This is Making Better Decisions. I'm your host, Ryan Sullivan. Decisions are where rubber meets the road for organizations. Each week, we'll be learning from people who are on the front lines of turning raw data into better outcomes for their organizations. This show is sponsored by Canopy Analytic, helping companies make better decisions using data. Welcome to another episode of the Making Better Decisions podcast. Today's guest has spent over 25 years doing analytics work, primarily in the sales, marketing, and customer spaces. Her career started as an analyst working across the pharmaceutical, manufacturing, insurance, and architecture industries. She then leaned into the marketing analytics niche, where she worked for Christopher & Banks and iMedia brands. Over this time, she's developed a working understanding of most of the modern analytics platforms that are on the market today, and now leads teams to do the same. Please welcome Director of Analytics at Designit, Jacquie Bailey. Welcome to the show, Jacquie.
Thanks, Ryan. I'm very excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you here. Thanks for taking the time. Let's get you kicked off with our opening question. What is one thing you wish more people knew about using data to make better decisions?
That the value of data itself comes from its ability to influence outcomes, positive outcomes. Too many people look at data as a way to measure historical things. Its value is really in helping you understand what levers to pull in order to make an impact or a positive outcome. If you think about it, we all use data on a regular basis to make a better decision. Something as simple as checking GPS before you get on the road to drive somewhere, right? You're using data to decide which route to take, what time to leave, and those kinds of things. For some reason, when we get into business situation, our brain just shuts down, and I've never understood why. I mean, it's simple for us in practical situations. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. This is something that we talk about in a lot of the educational stuff and the content that we put out is, number one, a focus on better decision making and driving outcomes, as opposed to just here's what happened, let's not do anything with it. I really like how you talked about its purpose being identifying levers that you can pull to influence the future that you want. Tell me a little bit more about ways that folks can, let's say they have some data, but they're not familiar with that concept. How can they dig into what they have and find the levers?
Great question. One of the other things I think is a problem in the analytics space is that people forget that problems are three-dimensional,
Mm.
meaning that the outcomes you're getting are happening because of processes or people. So, for example, let's say you want to reduce manufacturing costs, right? So you need to look at the three-dimensional picture of what goes into manufacturing costs, because those represent the levers you can pull. And I think too many times we're looking at, sort of what I call one-dimensional data. So it starts with understanding the three-dimensional problem. Here are the components of what I'm looking at. And then you measure each of those components and you start to make changes to one component and see what it does to another one, right? There's a testing in this. But I really think that too many analysts don't actually understand the three-dimensional process, right? You have someone who's analyzing the data from manufacturing, but have they ever gone out there and walked the floor? Do they actually understand the pieces or levers that exist, let alone which one to pull? It comes back to something I talk about a lot, and that is requirements gathering for reporting. So many people focus on what databases do I need, what level of access do I need, and all of that, versus what is the three-dimensional process or problem that you're trying to measure. It should all start from that, because that should define what data you're using for your inputs.
I like the example you use there of going out and, walking the floor or whatever. This is something that we talk about all the time. It's realizing that data is a representation of actions that real humans take in a business. And you can certainly get something out of, collecting the data and aggregating it and looking for trends, and there are all sorts of tools, whether it's, statistics or machine learning or artificial intelligence or just straight up visualization and, digging in and doing analyses. But if I don't have an understanding of the actual business, it's going to be limited how much impact I make because the business is the thing that we make the impact on. And it's very easy, I'm a tech nerd. I'm most happy at a keyboard. Um, but that's not always or even most of the time where whatever changes we would implement happen. So I've talked a couple times on the podcast about how analytics is about the people in the organization, but it's also about the people doing analytics.
For sure.
And to be really great, particularly at a high level, right? So once we start getting into like the management, the guidance and direction of analytics undertakings, it almost requires this kind of unicorn personality type of someone that has a really high degree of technical aptitude, but also has a really fundamental understanding of what this business does to make money, what its problems are, what its choke points are, all of that stuff. So now being a director, leading teams, helping other teams, how do we find more of these unicorns and help them find their way onto analytics teams?
I kind of think of it myself as turning more horses into unicorns. Um,
I like that.
human
Say more.
Thanks. Human beings actually have the ability to do this cognitive process. I mean, like I said, we check GPS to see how long it's going to take us, right? People can think through how data influences their decisions. It's really teaching them, or I guess expanding their horizons with a new way of thinking about data. When
Mm,
when I encounter an analyst, they've literally always been told, we want you to look at this dashboard and tell us what it means. And if one more person tells me they want a dashboard that's going to give them, data driven insights to change their business, the dashboard doesn't do that. Right. So for me, what I've done is I've taken analysts and I've tried to expand their horizon. Great, you're showing me a dashboard, you're telling me words, but what are the actions? What are the actual things that happened to get you to this outcome? Because I do this a lot with analysts under, the umbrella of Designit. I walk them through how to get insights. Now, is it a magical unicorn process that happens overnight? No, but it's like anything else. If you reinforce the behavior of not asking them, what does the data tell them? Okay, what did you do or what happened that made the result what it is? I don't care what the result is. I want you to tell me what happened to get there. So I think to your question about unicorns, I'm being told I'm a unicorn. I'm a person who analytics is who I am, not as much what I do. I am incapable of not analyzing everything around me, right? What happened to get even me to be the point where I'm doing this podcast. So there are unicorns in this world, but I strongly believe that you can take a horse and attach a unicorn by training them to think differently.
yeah. Tell me a little bit more about that process. So you were talking about how the outcomes were not as important as understanding what actions and choices and behaviors went into crafting that outcome. Could you maybe give us an example of, some sort of, hey, here's the situation and here's how we train the person to dig in and to look and to find those levers.
For sure. We have a team that manages blog and social posts for a large organization. And at the end of every month, I have a session with them where they're writing their insights. And I consistently get something like such and such blog outperformed the benchmarks. Okay. So, what influenced your decision to put that blog out there? And when you did, what did you expect to happen? I mean, it's a blog. So, did you expect it to perform that well? I mean, if you did, telling me it performed well, it's not, an insight, but it's about what were your thought processes?
Mm.
How did you pick that blog? How did you pick when it was published? How did you decide, what links were in it as well as the content? So how purposefully were you about what you did? And so then you can start to say, okay, this outperformed the benchmarks, but it was because we chose a subject that we knew that people were engaged in. At that point, it becomes a test, right? We decided our hypothesis was that this article would perform well because of X. And so now our insight is if we do more articles based on this hypothesis, right, we're going to have more positive outcomes. So you see what I'm saying? You take it back to what actual elements went into the decision to do that. And that's a sort of a simplified, you would think it's a simplified example, but I go through this with a team of blog and social analysts every month.
I like this. It feels both like small and enormous at the same
Yeah.
time. It's this idea of instead of saying, we're going to tell you what happened, if we change that goal to being about identifying and appropriately positively or negatively reinforcing business behaviors that were taken, that seems like it achieves your goal, right?
That's an actionable insight, right? I mean, you can't take action implies that an actionable insight implies that there's an action involved. Sales went up. There's no action there, right?
Yeah.
People didn't buy things. Okay, that's got a lot to unpack underneath it. And so it's really kind of reframing all of the organization's perspective on data. I mean, another thing that it frustrates me about companies' approach to data is that they treat it as an asset like a building, right? We're only going to invest as much as we have to invest in it to make it usable. If you started looking at it as a product, right? You have product which is data that is consumable by people who can use that data to reduce expenses or increase revenue, well, then doesn't that make investing in this product more valuable? Because if you look at the action that this data is going to drive, there's a very clear path to a return on that investment.
Mm.
But instead, most organizations treat it, like a building or any kind of other corporate asset instead of a living, breathing, I don't know, maybe member of the team,
Yeah.
which again, yeah, that takes me into AI, which that's a whole nother subject.
I think one of the things that is interesting about this space is there's a balance to be stricken between the way that I intimately feel, which is almost any decision or process that is happening within an organization could be made better. With the other side of the balance being thinking of things from kind of a total cost optimization perspective. How do you balance picking the places to go after to find those insights?
Well, it's like anything else where you're going to have the biggest impact. I mean, you're right. Every process can be, optimized, but you look at, so for example, in one program I did, right? I calculated that a 1% increase in conversion on the website was going to be $7 million. Okay, so how much are you willing to invest to dig into the data that's going to help you increase your website conversion by 1%? Like, I mean, you're up to $7 million if you increase it, right?
Hmm.
So when you start looking at the sort of the outcome to the process, you know how much the whatever it is that you're doing, brings in revenue. It's not as hard to make that connection. If your goal is to reduce operating margin, then you go after the things that constitute the biggest part of your operating margin. Once you flip it into, here's my ultimate goal, here's the 3D things that contribute to me making or not making that goal, and then you focus on how to make those better, and
Mm.
everybody wins.
So, one of the common hurdles that I encounter in answering this question of kind of where do we focus our efforts is there's almost uncertainty about the uncertainty. There's kind of this meta problem of, well, wait, don't you need to do analysis to know where all of the possible impacts will be? And then you got to, based on that analysis, you decide where you're going to dig in. And that's just kind of like the empirical problem of finding these places where you can have big impact and then engaging with them. There's also just because we are all humans, you know, jockeying and politics and a changing economy and a market that feels like it's changing faster every day with a lot of the technological advancements. So it feels like there's, currents or winds or whatever you want to call them blowing in all sorts of different directions. How do we navigate that piece of the puzzle, that like very human piece of the puzzle, to find the places where there is the impact? Like even taking the time to find out, hey, that 1% increase gives us $7 million. That takes some time.
For sure it does. I mean, and again, I'm going to say that that goes back to the availability of data, right? You can't figure that out, but you're never going to be able to battle politics because every company changes their priorities.
Yeah.
Many of my clients in a 12-month period have changed their priorities 14 times. But the things that you largely can influence are those that involve humans and machines. So it, there's a lot of things you can't control, like macroeconomics, but any kind of process efficiency today can still happen through improving better machinery, better process, and upskilling people or providing people with more information. And then you get into marketing analytics, which is influencing people, right? So in this day and age, you still can change human behavior if you focus on it. And you can buy bigger, better machines to do things. So you let go of the stuff you can't control, and we spend way too much time worrying about all of the edge cases that we can't control. Eh, No business ever is going to say, no, we don't want more revenue. No, we don't want better gross margins. I mean, start with the no brainer stuff.
Mm,
And once you get down that path, if you start with that stuff and you prove it works, people become data addicts.
yes.
As soon as it works, people are like, okay, how do we do that again?
Yeah.
So you just start with I don't want to say it's easy because, changing human behavior is not easy, but you start with the controllables and you focus on your proof of concept that this can be done. Or as I say, you eat the elephant one bite at a time. Stop worrying about the rest of it.
Okay, so let's for the sake of argument say that I'm bought into this, right?
You
Because
bought into this. Great. Thanks.
yeah, yeah. I mean, goodness, and I think this is a feeling that most analytics professionals feel, and I think that anybody who's been in the space long enough knows. I mean, certainly there's a class of person that just sees it and it's falls on deaf ears, but for the most part, when you're capable of showing someone not just hey revenue went up, here are the three things that we did in the last 6 months that impacted that revenue growth the most. And
Mhm.
here's kind of the relative proportion of each. When you're capable of showing somebody that, they get super excited.
For sure.
So if I can use a slightly off color metaphor for this, how do we gateway drug the rest of these people? Like, how do we get those, how do we make believers?
The proof is in the pudding. I mean, even me, I'm a cynic. When you tell me something is going to work, you have to prove it to me. And
Mhm,
so, as a consultant, you do a lot of proof of concept kind of things.
mhm.
Let me prove to you that this factually can happen. And I'm not going to say that you're going to convert everyone, but I believe that most business professionals can get their head around if you put it in terms of the process they manage, right? Here's the process you manage that we want to target first in order to make a change, and it'll be a measurable change, and we're going to report often. And you do it in I don't know that I want to call it a low risk way, but you take one piece of the business and you focus on that, and then you make the desired impact. Then like I said, like you said, it's like a drug. I mean, I hate to say this, but as a consultant, I guess an off color metaphor, I'm a pusher. So I want you to take one of my pills, so I can prove to you that it's going to make you feel all better. And some of that really comes down to credibility. I mean, I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah.
I have to believe that a lot of what people give me a chance is because I offer them credibility, and in some cases, maybe a lifeline because it's this or nothing else, right?
Mm.
They run out of options.
Yeah, I like how you describe that. It reminds me of kind of like a silly analogy of, within every organization or department or team, it's kind of like you got to get the snowball rolling downhill and it picks up steam and size and speed and all of that stuff. But I think as you mentioned, it's really about okay, we pick some table stakes. What are some of the biggest numbers that we know people care about? We care about growth, we care about top line, we care about gross margin, we care about bottom line. What are the three things that we've done in the last 6 months that have most positively or negatively impacted those numbers? That's a great place to start. And if somebody sees that information and is like, oh, we got nothing to do here, you know,
Right.
we might have a bigger problem.
Well, and I'm not sure that that's going to be a productive engagement, and I'll probably beat my head against a wall anyway. So,
Yeah.
sometimes you cut your losses. It's not going to resonate with everyone,
Mm.
but one company at a time, hopefully we can start changing the paradigm of how people look at data.
Yeah.
I think we have to. It's just a point we're at with
You
the whole space.
you told me a story when we were prepping for the podcast
Yeah.
about one of the things that you did to kind of get the snowball rolling. Can you share that with the audience?
Yeah. So this was when I wasn't in a position of authority. And I was sitting in my little analytics world, and I had access to data that made me understand how human behavior was impacting things. And the leadership was making decisions, and I was like, why are they doing that? The data says that's the wrong thing to do. So I've been on a marketing campaign with my data. And so I put together a PowerPoint deck that was called Fun Facts About Our Customers. In this case, it was customer analytics. And so I just put together charts about, 70% of the revenue came from 20% of the customers, right? And just different things. And one of my slides was we sold clothes, Christopher Banks, you already told that. I said that clothes don't make money. Clothes don't generate revenue. People generate revenue when they buy the clothes. Clothes, like data, inherently don't have any value in the warehouse. And so I went on this whole marketing campaign of how if you engage the people to buy the clothes, right, you make more money. And then it just became this thing where I did it quarterly and people would just be like, "Hey, when's the next quarterly update coming out?" Because they were actually invested in changing the fun facts or the results that I was putting out in the newsletter. And so I started with this at the beginning. Human beings have in the 21st century become used to looking at data and informing their decisions. They're not quite there to the point that they actually even realize it's data that they're looking at, right? But if you put it in front of them in an easily digestible format, they're going to be hungry for the information. In their head, it's information, not data. And so it became like this cult following. Um, and so you can get people to care about their piece of the pie.
Yeah. By just kind of showing them. I used to do quite a bit of Power BI training. And so it was kind of in a room with, 20 analysts or, maybe managers. Every once in a while, you'd have kind of a decision maker in the back that wanted to pick some things up and know some new things their team could do and, what have you. But the point that I would make when I was talking about this particular element of kind of, okay, you believe in this, I believe in this, the tech is good for it, but now how do we get everybody else on board? I talked about taking a decision maker's finger and putting it directly on the pulse of the business. And as soon as you start showing them that, they will start relying on it. Because who doesn't want more confidence in their decisions? Who is not human? Who doesn't have, some level of uncertainty or insecurity? And like, I think I'm making the right call. I hope I'm making the right call. Well, wouldn't it be great if I knew I was making the right call?
Right.
And then
Right.
we come to rely on it, and then that starts the cycle and the snowball's going downhill.
Right. Because once they're reliant on it too, you can then say, hey, you probably want to make this number better. So the next level of data says that this number has been going down. How about we figure out how to bring it back up? Right. And it's really again digging into the three-dimensional aspects of what contributes to the data and what's going to get you to your goal. I think it's great to be goal oriented, but you can't say, "Yeah, I want more revenue. That's our goal for the year, more revenue." Like you're never going to get there.
Because it's not tangible enough?
It's not influenceable enough at that level.
Mm,
I mean, what are you going to do to make more revenue? The answer could be 75,000 different things depending on your business.
yeah,
You can't impact things at that macro of a level. It's just naive. You
yeah,
have to go down and figure out what contributes to your revenue today.
yeah. We've skirted around some of what I'm about to ask, but I want to put the question to you specifically. What things in the data space are most difficult right now, and how are you attacking that?
Wow. I'm going to say right now, accessibility to data,
Mm,
especially in large organizations. organizations that have been around for 30 years or more, right? We talked about how long I've been doing this. And I remember when big data was a million rows because you couldn't fit it in Excel. But I mean,
Yep.
we're now got, 400 terabytes of data being collected every day. And so companies that have been in business for more than 30 years, they have a lot of tech debt that they're slowly resolving as they move to cloud platforms, et cetera. But they have a lot of data. I'm going to call them assets for now that are sitting on people's desktops in the form of Microsoft Access databases and Excel spreadsheets. And so
Yeah.
for those types of organizations, getting their data corralled, because what's happened with all of that is there's as many variations of the truth that, as there is people with our own databases. And so it's not only a huge financial effort to get your arms around that, but what are you gonna do? Go to every employee's computer and check it out?
Yeah.
So, for me, it's been sort of establishing a data governance, one source of truth, and getting accessibility to data because those people are used to having it on their desktop. They're not going to give it up if you tell them, yeah, I'll get you a new one, but it's going to be 6 to 8 months, right? So it's getting everybody to buy in to a single version of the truth. I mean, you talk about Power BI reports. I cannot even tell you how many times we've taken what somebody was doing in Excel and we move it to Power BI. Well, Power BI doesn't know all that fancy stuff you were doing on the back end to make the data look cleaner, right? So
Mm.
it just exposes all the things that have been done over the years. I mean, a lot of times the people we're taking it over from didn't even know. They've been running some SQL script somebody wrote 15 years ago and they've just been hit, run. So there's just a massive amount of tech debt sitting out there.
Of all of the answers that I've gotten to that question, I think that's the one that has hit home with me personally. And what I think is interesting about that is lots of times, like when we think about like, all right, what's hard right now? My mind naturally goes to something new, right? It's like, oh, AI or, whatever. And that is a story as old as computers.
Yes.
And whether this is a perfect answer or not, like I have at least settled on what my personal approach to this is when I'm
Right.
consulting with other organizations, with the caveat that we're talking about large organizations,
Well,
right? Like if we're talking about, like a 10 or $20 million organization, we can just blow it up and start over and it's not
right.
going to be a
Right.
crazy amount of time. But if we're talking about, a massive multinational, many, whatever, you get it.
Mhm.
It's much harder. And the thing that I have found is it has to be like a grassroots movement. There's this idea, I'm a armchair freakonomics, behavioral economics, whatever fan.
Right.
And they talk a lot on that podcast about self-weeding gardens. So finding some way, and in business that usually means a value proposition. So more money or time or savings, to gradually find those things and provide a better option to people. So if we can piece by piece gather each of those things, exactly as you said, and obviously this is a double-edged sword, there's a lot of pain, but all the logic is there. And with this kind of grassroots movement, what we find is that we uncover the business logic that was living there. Let's make that available to everybody. Let's try to, and I hate the overuse of this word, but I think this is an appropriate use. Apply leverage to that logic. So as of right now, one person or a small group of people can see or use the cleaning and the understanding of the business and the way that the calculations work, if we can take that and migrate it to something centralized, provided it's important enough,
Mhm.
now the entire organization never has to think about that at all. The biggest thing in this regard that I see at large organizations is duplicated efforts. How many people have to be running the same queries or have to refigure out the exact same business logic that many other people or teams are doing independently? And if we can get that into one place, number one, all the logic is already there. And
Right.
number two, no one else ever has to figure that same stuff out again.
Right. I agree. And it's the availability of common sources, asset sources of truth. Here's what I've learned recently, and that is that companies of that size who don't start dealing with this are going to have a really big problem in the next 5 to 10 years because all of the owners of that stuff are going to retire. Or if you're a company who's thinking about you have to lay off people, guess what? Their desktop is where all of that data was coming from. They had institutional knowledge of how it works. You didn't do anything about it and you laid them off last week, and your report breaks a month from now when their ID is officially shut off. So I think the rubber's going to hit hit the road on this one very soon
Mm,
because the people who really built and are running those assets right now, they're not gonna be there forever. So then what? You gonna wait until that happens?
yeah. Yeah, and then you see this string of kinda handoffs, and it's always like this helter skelter kind of super fast, and then that next person is like, "Oh, I just do what Linda showed me how to
Right,
do, and now I'm just, like, punching this," and you lose. Yeah, I agree with that. It's, you know, it's that old, like, what would happen if so and so got hit by a bus tomorrow?
right.
Like, we wanna build resilient processes.
Yeah, and those aren't resilient.
Exactly.
By the way, I was told I had to change it by everybody who knows me. I now have to say, "What if I get hit by the lotto?" Because it's a really good question. But, I mean, it's completely true. You're putting from a purely business risk standpoint, and this is where leaders need to be concerned, you literally have a living, breathing risk to your business
Yeah.
that you aren't disclosing, to your shareholders, but it exists in every company.
Jackie, we've gotten to learn a ton from you, but I
Me too.
always like the opportunity to give everyone the chance to get to know a little bit about you. So, outside of data and analytics, tell us a little bit about yourself.
As I said, I'm analytical in everything I can do. Imagine my family, I make them crazy, so I'm just gonna tell you that. But, I actually, because of the agents I work with, I work 100% at home. So I'm not nearly as interesting as I used to be, but I do I do have 2 dogs who keep me company and bark at everyone who walks down the street. And then I have a cat who's smarter than both of them. But one thing that people find most bizarre or interesting is that I actually have an Etsy store where I make custom made jewelry. And I opened it in 2013. It's a hobby now, but I ran it as a business for a couple years. I've actually sold almost 3,700 pieces of jewelry.
Wow, that's so cool.
It's even for me, I look at it and I'm like, but yeah, so that's probably the most interesting fact. Now, I'm a lot more busy than I used to be, but I definitely still enjoy doing it. So it's relegated to hobby status now, but it's still fun.
I love it. That is awesome. So, if anybody wants to learn a little bit more about anything that you're saying, or possibly check out your Etsy store, what are some of the best places that people can find to connect with you?
Definitely LinkedIn. I mean, I'm kind of a LinkedIn junkie. I'm always checking everybody's feed. So reach out to me on LinkedIn, connect, start a conversation because as you might have noticed, I kind of like talking about this stuff and not everybody wants to talk to me about it. So,
Well, you found your home here on the Data Podcast. We could talk all day.
well, I call it my tribe. I tell people I found my tribe again.
Yeah,
So, Ryan, don't be surprised if I hit you up on LinkedIn.
anytime. Tell us about how can we find your Etsy store if we want to?
Oh, so that one's a little bit more complicated because I named it weird. But if you're looking for it, the store is actually called Beaded Designs Jacquie. Also, you should note that my name is spelled weird. Blame my mom, Jacquie. But if you can't find it, reach out to me on LinkedIn and I'll hook you up.
I love it. Jacquie, the amount of experience and your comfortability talking about it just made it feels like so many nuggets of value and like a very grounding effect in what really matters was just so clear in getting to talk to you. So I can't thank you enough for taking the time to come on to speak with me, to share some of your time with all the listeners here.
Well, and I thank you for letting me just freeform think on your platform. So
That's what we like. We like just people talking, the people that know data just getting to talk about it. That's what we're going for.
Well, thank you again. Anytime you want me back, I'm happy to come.
I love it. That's the best endorsement we could get. I also want to make sure to thank the listeners. Thanks so much, especially if you made it this far for listening to the podcast. If you like it, please make sure to tell a friend. Go out, give us a like or a subscribe or a review, hopefully a really good review. It really helps to keep the podcast going. We really appreciate all of you listening. Jacquie, thank you again so much for coming on. And this has been another episode of the Making Better Decisions podcast. Have a great day. That's a wrap for today's episode of Making Better Decisions. For show notes and more, visit makingbetterdecisions.live. A special thank you to our sponsor, Canopy Analytic. Canopy Analytic is a boutique consultancy focused on business intelligence and data engineering. They help companies make better decisions using data. For more information, visit canopyanalytic.com. There's a better way. Let's find it together and make better decisions. Thank you so much for listening. We'll catch you next week. Peace.